I travel a lot, and pretty often. I'm originally from Minsk. As you know, we are the geographic center of Europe. A lot of us use this to our advantage. It's super easy to visit neighboring Baltic states and even other countries. I often travel around Europe by car, starting in Minsk and heading to the Italian coast. It's a chance to see foreign countries, do some shopping, and finally relax at the seaside resorts. It's just simply beautiful. So we get together in a small group, 3 or 4 cars, and we cruise along joyfully. That's how it was that August of 2013. 3 cars, 7 people. We're usually always together, but this time in Austria, 3 of our friends' cars got separated from us. Lyra and Anton, a married couple of 28 and 42 years old respectively, and Lyra's 19-year-old brother, Vadim, who was traveling with us for the first time. They decided to stop in some rundown town that was famous for something I don't really remember. That's how the split happened. The thing is, we travel along different routes. Even a foreign country can become tiresome if you look at it one-sidedly and repeatedly. We considered deviating 250 kilometers into the Austrian wilderness for the sake of some excellent traditional food. It's a bit of a silly reason, but it's nice. When we got to around Augsburg, Germany, we decided to stick to our pre-planned route and head to Switzerland, while the guys, meanwhile, went to Austria for food. We also thought this idea was stupid because the return route lay through Austria and Czech Republic. It would have been perfectly possible to stop there on the way back, but, as they say, the hunt is worse than captivity. We agreed to keep in touch by mobile phone and meet in Como, where we were supposed to stay for 3 days. Things went wrong that evening when Lyra stopped responding to my messages on Viber, and after a while, the app stopped saying that they had even been received by her phone. Anton's phone was also unresponsive. I did not have Vadim's number because we were not close. Someone in the second car had it though. I distinctly remembered him leaving it the other day for contact. My husband called them, explained the situation, and asked them to contact Vadim. When it became clear that all 3 phones were unavailable, we knew something was wrong. We stopped and decided to head to Austria. We spent the night in Feldkirch. We set off early the next morning, and within 2 hours, we were in the desired settlement. This turned out to be a small alpine village. No one had seen any Belarusian tourists. We drove to the nearest town along the road that they were supposed to have taken. There was no trace of them there either. The police listened to us, and despite our confused story, did not refuse to help. The last location pinpointed by geolocation was 50 kilometers away from any settlement or hamlet. It was also in a mountainous area. A day later, in a remote valley with no sign of a road, the police discovered a car with Belarusian license plates. It was the car belonging to Anton. 2 hours later, a young man, it was Vadim, was found in a dilapidated, abandoned house. He told us the following story when we met back up with them. It's a little crazy, but I will tell his story exactly how he told me. At first, everything was fine. We were following the GPS. The road was completely clear and the journey was easy. The first difficulty we encountered was that the GPS took us to the wrong village. We googled a map and it turned out that the GPS had been wrong. We had deviated a good 50 kilometers by taking a wrong turn, but we could get back by taking a small road through the valley. It was a relatively easy route, with no turns or exits. We set off immediately. The road was gravel and clearly abandoned, which didn't surprise us. The area is sparsely populated. What was odd was that, by our calculations, the drive to a busy road would take about an hour. But when the clock showed 9:30 p.m. and the highway was nowhere in sight, we became weary. We'd been driving for a good hour and a half, and the landscape was still the same. No buildings, no settlements, nothing. Just a narrow gravel road and sparse trees. We opened the map again, but another unpleasant surprise awaited us. There was no internet and no signal. Our GPS stopped loading the map the moment we turned onto a dirt road and seemed to freeze completely. A deep anxiety gripped us as dusk settled firmly on the earth and we were stuck in the middle of nowhere. We drove another 3 kilometers and spotted the outlines of houses to the left of the gravel road. They were not very far away, but we did not see the exit to the village. We decided to go there and ask for directions as our gadgets were useless and we were completely disoriented. We locked the car and headed toward the houses. By the time we got there, it was completely dark, but the houses were unlit, a faint glow streaming from a few windows. As we approached the last house, we noticed a woman standing in the street, just standing there, half turned toward us. Lyra, who spoke German well, greeted her and started to explain that we were tourists and lost, but the woman abruptly turned away and walked toward the house. We shrugged and approached the door of the house next door. No one opened the door for us. It just swung open on its own after a push. A small room opened up before our eyes. There was no electricity, but a candle burned inside. What was also odd was that the house looked unusually old-fashioned. We went inside. A small entryway led into the kitchen. There was just a stove and a wooden counter, with homemade open wooden shelves. I don't know what Lyra and Anton were thinking, but I was so confused that my brain refused to produce any coherent information. How could they be using candles and stoves in civilized Australia in the 21st century? Calling out to the hosts and looking around, we heard some sounds. It sounded like conversation. We quietly moved toward the only door. In the next room, there was a table at which people were sitting. It was a family of 5, and they were talking about something. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes. The furnishings were as shabby as the kitchen, and there was no hint of modernity. No television, no radio, no nothing. It seemed as if we were witnessing some historical scene. The people did not react to our speech, as if they didn't see us at all. But then Anton approached a man, presumably the owner of the house. He patted him on the shoulder and was about to say something when the man suddenly raised his head. Then everyone else, as if on cue, stared at Anton. Only, their faces had changed slightly. Their eyes seemed to have lost their color and turned white, pure white. Their skin had acquired a strange, bluish-brown hue, the color of necrotic tissue. In a split second, these perfectly normal people had transformed into something not quite real. We were frozen, and Anton stood frozen, staring into the glass eyes of this strange man. Meanwhile, this strange family stood up and, staring at us, slowly moved in our direction. We rushed out of this terrible house, despite the terror we felt. I passed the door, which was a few steps away. Finding myself in the kitchen, I heard a terrible slam behind me. The candle immediately went out, plunging the kitchen into darkness. I turned and tried to open the door, but it would not budge. I rushed headlong into the street, intending to call for help, but then I froze. I was frozen like a stone statue. I did not see a single house around. I saw nothing at all around. In place of where 15 buildings had previously been, there was now a meadow. There was a wind blowing. There were no buildings, no fences, nothing. Stunned and half-mad, I rushed back to the house. At first, I thought my legs would refuse to carry me into that dreadful house, but this unknown emptiness, unimaginable and incomprehensible, turned out to be more terrifying than even that devilish family. Anton and Lyra were there, and I had to let them out. I burst into the kitchen. I began pounding on the door with all of my might. I started calling for my sister and Anton. My arms and shoulders were bleeding as I tried to force the door open. It wouldn't budge. The most terrifying thing was that from the moment the interior door slammed shut, I had not heard a single sound. No screams or knocking, no sounds of a scuffle or struggle. The cosmic silence was more frightening than the most deafening, heart-rending scream. Realizing I could not get the door open, I decided to break out the window and get in, or rather, to pull the boys out through it. Stumbling, I rounded the house and ran to the window, but there was no glass or anything in its place. The window frame was just an empty black. The dim glow was gone, only darkness now. I pulled myself together and, with some difficulty, squeezed inside. Then my mind went completely blank. There was no longer a table and no door. Only a moment ago I had been battering at that door, and now it was gone. I approached the door with my legs wobbling. I saw moonlight streaming evenly onto the meadow and illuminating the landscape. I darted back into the room. I was still calling for Anton and Lyra. My temples were pounding and I was shaking. I could see the stars shining because the roof was gone. It was almost completely caved in. I had no idea what was happening. My brain simply refused to believe it was real. I ran and screamed like a child until my voice finally broke, and then I started crying. I huddled into a corner just crying, and then I eventually passed out. I came to when the police brought me around. We never found out what happened to Anton and Lyra. The police found nothing either. No bodies, no trace of the other two people. But there was no village in the area, and there never was, and no gravel road either. The boys were driving through a meadow. The house, or rather the ruins of the house, was 2 kilometers away. There was no way that they could have seen it from where the car had stopped, especially given the evening. We decided to go to the village, where the guys realized their GPS had failed them and found the exit. There, the locals told us the story. There are no settlements in those parts now, that is true, but there was a village there once upon a time, almost 2 centuries ago. They lived there in isolation. They were strange and secretive people, only about 17 households in total. They were all pagans or something like that, so few people befriended them. There were many rumors about them, about abominable rituals, about sacrificial animals they stole from neighboring villages, and about human sacrifices. And there were cases of people disappearing. Whether this happened or not, it's impossible to know now. Only once did a village disappear. A local resident noticed 2 sheep missing and suspected pagans of the theft because such things had happened before. So, having gathered a few men and armed themselves, they set out to deal with the thieves. When they arrived, the village was just gone. No houses, no people, not even a trace of either of them, as if nothing had ever been there. You might have thought they'd come to the wrong place, but only one house remained in its place. They went inside, but there was no one there. The table was set, food was on plates, but no one was there. They searched everything from the basement to the attic. All came up empty. They returned, conferred, and decided never to go there again. They decided that what happened there was some kind of a curse. Word spread around. The police and many people from the city came, but they could not find any explanation at all. The abandoned house has stood there ever since. The police were shocked, citing the idea that the couple had likely gone on their own. They sent us packing. The case turned out to be useless in Minsk too. No bodies, no case. They closed the search, deciding their Austrian colleagues were right, and the couple decided to stay in Austria and not return. I saw that house, and I know my friends. They couldn't go anywhere on their own, at night, in a pristine Austrian meadow. Anton had his own business, not big but profitable. They had no reason to stay in Austria. I saw that, and he was not lying. From a healthy 19-year-old, he turned into a troublemaker, a frightened and broken man who barely sleeps and is heavily dependent on antidepressants now. He is scarred by what happened. I don't know how this could be or what it even was. I really don't know what happened there. Hey, hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you want to hear more, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment because it lets YouTube know you like the content and helps more people to see these videos. My next big goal for the channel is 100,000 subscribers, and as a celebration, I will be doing a Q&A video once we hit that goal. Thank you, and back to the stories. I am not a religious person, and I do not believe in God. Most of my relatives on my mother's side live in a small village in the Moscow region and follow pagan traditions. Their beliefs began to form back in the late 1970s, long before anyone had ever even heard of Dolboslav, a Slavic pagan. In the early 1990s, they formally registered a pagan community in their village, calling themselves the Rosici. They lived in isolation and refused contact even with my mother. They condemned her for leaving for Moscow after school, which is a city that they despised. Of all of my relatives, only my cousin, Sviatoslav, technically my uncle, kept in touch with her. He often visited us secretly. When I turned 18 years old, he unexpectedly called and invited me to stay with him in the village. Curious about the lives and customs of these strange relatives, I gladly accepted. The village lay far from civilization. I traveled there by commuter train, and then walked at least 5 kilometers through thick forest. I had not realized such wilderness still existed in the Moscow region. On the way, a man driving a horse-drawn cart appeared. This old man gave me a lift the rest of the way. My uncle's house stood right in the center of the village and was easy to find. While the other villagers lived in plain log cabins, my uncle had built himself an actual tower. Svyatoslav welcomed me quite warmly and led me inside. Then he immediately poured me some mead. We sat and talked late into the night. He made me a bed on a bench while he lay down on his bed in his room. Tired from the long trip, I fell asleep at once. The next morning I had to fetch water. There was not even a water tower in the village. Everyone had to draw water from the well and fetch it. As I hauled up a bucket, a group of boys about 16 or 17 approached to do the same. We started talking. They told me that soon it would be the Ivan Kupala festival and that everyone would go into the forest to look for fern flowers. I laughed at them because even school children should know that ferns don't bloom. Then again, I doubted this village had a school at all. When they learned I was Svyatoslav's nephew, they immediately invited me to join their search. Clearly, my uncle's name carried weight in this place. I decided not to ruin their excitement by pointing out that ferns cannot flower. We agreed to meet at my uncle's house in 2 days, just after sunset, and then we parted ways. I spent the next 2 days wandering around the village and its surroundings. Weirdly, I somehow never saw those boys again while wandering around those 2 days. It's not a big place, so it was a little surprising. The other villagers eyed me warily, though not with hostility. I just don't think they were used to visitors from the city, even if they were family. That evening, as arranged, the group gathered by my uncle's fence. I had packed a backpack full of gear, but they told me to leave it behind. Puzzled, I took it back inside and went with them empty-handed. The forest was dense. People here must have known it well, because they went in without a map, compass, or anything like a GPS. I guess growing up around a small place like this means you know everything like the back of your hand. We pushed on into the deepest part. Younger children of 10 or 12 followed at first, but soon scattered off in all directions. Suddenly, a scream echoed out. At first we could not tell where it came from. A minute later we found a ravine where a tall fellow of about 20 years old had fallen down. He cursed strangely and tried to climb, but couldn't. Several boys clambered down and pulled him up. We decided to stop there and light a fire instead of going farther. I was struck by how nimbly they jumped over the flames while playing their silly kids' games, or maybe it was a ritual or something, I have no idea. They would just jump over the campfire, back and forth. When they had finished their games, we resumed our procession in search of fern and flowers. We walked until dawn. Needless to say, no flowers appeared. On the way back, lost in thought, I lagged behind. After 15 minutes, I realized I was completely alone. I had lost the trail and did not know the forest. I shouted for help, but no one heard me. My phone and GPS navigator were in the backpack at home. Cursing the person who told me to leave it, I kept walking and reached a swamp. I was exhausted and knew I did not have the energy to cross it right now. Giving up, I lay down under a bush. Someone would find me sooner or later, was what I thought. When I awoke, judging by the sun, it was near noon. Through the trees, I spotted an opening and followed it. To my surprise, I came out on the very road I had taken 3 days before. Choosing the right direction, I hurried toward the village, which now seemed strangely deserted. Even when I reached my uncle's house, no one appeared. But inside, the entire village had gathered at Svyatoslav's. Seeing me, my uncle leapt from the bench and embraced me. It turned out I had been missing for an entire week. They began questioning me all at once. I told them everything that happened to me. Their faces showed surprise and even fear. They asked me no more after that. That evening, over another glass of mead, my uncle told me a few details that made my hair stand on end. First, there were no ravines or swamps anywhere near the village. And second, Most disturbing of all, they do not celebrate Ivan Kupala Day. It's not an authentic Slavic holiday, but a Christian adaptation marking John the Baptist. No one here believes in blooming ferns or any of the things I told him. I asked about the kids, and even though I gave descriptions of faces and clothes and how they played games, he knew no one in the village like that. Those kids who came to find me did not exist. The boy who fell down the ravine, no sign of him ever existing. I stayed there for another week, though I hardly dared step beyond the tower fence. Then I returned to the city. I will never go back to that place. I am 19 years old. I'm a skeptic by nature, and usually take anything unusual in stride. But what happened this summer in our village shook even a non-believer like me. Let me green text what happened. As usual, I went out there to relax. We usually hang out there with friends every summer. I took the train, and then walked a couple of kilometers to the little village house. It was 2 stories high with a balcony. No one else was there. My grandparents lived in another village, and my parents stayed in the city, so it was just me this time. I stepped inside, picked up my phone, and started calling my friends. By evening, a good group had gathered. It was me, Anton, Kolyan, and the 3 girls, Kristina, Ksyuka, and Svita, 6 of us in all. Since I could not leave the house unattended to go to the store, we decided to draw lots. The 4 losers would have to go. In the end, Kristina, Ksyuka, Svita, and Anton went shopping. Kolyan and I stayed behind to chop some wood and start a fire. We did it quickly. Half an hour later, the others returned, and the fun began. Time flew by. We sat around the fire, eating shashlik and telling scary stories. Dusk settled in, and the moon eventually came out. Anton went off to run an errand and said that he would be back soon. While the others kept chatting, I stepped away to pee. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a light come on in the house upstairs. I was thinking it was Anton, and that's where he had been all this time. I thought I would go up and catch that sneaky fuck doing whatever he was doing. I went quietly inside and listened. A floorboard creaked on the 2nd floor. It felt like someone was standing still and waiting. I thought, fine, I will wait here and scare him when he comes down. 5 minutes went by, then 10, and then 15 passed. No one came down the stairs. I thought he must have fallen asleep or something. There are 2 bedrooms upstairs. My room, where the light had turned on, and farther down the hall was my parents' room. I began to climb the stairs carefully, picturing Anton's face when I jumped out at him. How wrong I was. I reached the top, walked slowly to my bedroom, and suddenly threw the door open. The light was on, but no one was there. Before I could switch it off, I heard quick steps, retreating down the hall into my parents' room. I was getting kinda tired of the games, so I thought, fuck it, I am going to get him and scare him now. I opened the door carefully, stepped inside, and glanced at the bed. The bed was empty. Maybe he was hiding on the balcony. I swung open the balcony door and froze. Down below, I could see that Anton was sitting by the fire with everyone else. What the hell? My mind went blank. I stepped back into the room and saw something standing in the doorway with its back to me. I looked closer. It looked like a little girl with twisted, broken wrists. It heard me, turned, and started moving towards me. From here on, I only know what my friends told me. Upon hearing my scream, Anton and Kolyan jumped up and ran into the house. The girl sitting by the fire saw me come out onto the balcony, swinging a club. I somehow made it back down to the fire, but could not explain anything until morning. I don't remember doing any of this, as I had blacked out and was on autopilot or something. Only when I finally calmed down and snapped back into consciousness was I able to tell my friends what happened, but I don't think they really believed me. It was about mid-August time when this happened to me. Most were getting ready for the new school year after vacation. My family not so much. My parents had barely managed to get permission from my father's boss for a week's leave, so they went straight to Crimea. On the way they dropped me off with my grandmother, who lives somewhere near Izhevsk. I had not seen her in years, but my mom said the fresh air would do me good, They stopped the car in front of a small, old, one-story house. Grandma lived on a farm with only a few houses, with each about a kilometer apart. There was just one store, half a kilometer away. It was clear pretty quickly how remote it was, but at least there was a lake nearby. Grandma Olya greeted me warmly and immediately set up a small bed for me in a separate room near the window. She had recently turned 80 years old. Her hearing was poor and she moved really slowly. After pancakes for lunch, I decided to go for a swim. The sun was already setting, and the lake was about a 15-minute walk through a small forest. I figured I could make it there before dark. Halfway there, I realized I wouldn't. The sun had already gone down, and I still had about 10 minutes left to walk. The forest was dense, the path full of roots, and I kept on tripping. By the time I reached the lake, it was dusk. I did not hesitate. I stripped down quickly and plunged into the water. It was cold, and I could not stay long. Climbing back onto the shore to dress, I noticed a small, very dark house on the opposite bank. A barely visible door opened, and a hunchback figure stepped outside. I ducked into the nearest bush. Looking more closely, I saw it was an extremely old, bent woman dressed in rags. Her hair hung like a dirty white cloth. I could not make out her face. She dragged a huge sack out of the house, pulled it to the water, opened it, and dumped its contents onto the lake. I could not see what it was, but what happened next made me shudder. The old woman looked straight at me. In that moment, either the moonlight caught her or my eyes adjusted, and I saw her face. Her face was wrinkled and furious with a long nose. Her eyes were narrow slits. Her toothless mouth stretched into a smile. Maybe she had only noticed my clothes on the sand. Either way, she climbed into a boat lying on the shore and began rowing toward me with long, sweeping strokes. For about 3 minutes I just stood there, frozen, watching her come halfway across the water. As she neared, her face became clearer. Her eyes were wild, and her tongue kept flicking out to lick her lips. I jumped from the bushes, grabbed my things, and ran barefoot into the forest. I did not have time to dress. All I cared about was staying on the path, because it was already hard to see. 5 minutes later, I was home. Out of breath, I threw my clothes on the chest and went to bed. Grandma was asleep. I did not want to wake her or tell her what had happened. 15 minutes passed by as I lay there, unable to sleep. I kept thinking of that old woman and what she had done after I ran. My bed was right next to the window. To calm myself down, I stared at the night sky. Gradually, my panic faded, and I started to drift off. Suddenly, someone knocked loudly on the window. I opened my eyes at once. I was lying on my side, with my back towards it. The full moon cast clear shadows across the wall. In the center was a shadow, shaped like the old woman. For a few seconds, I thought I was imagining it. Then, the shadow grew a long arm, and there was another knock. I heard her press her face to the glass, rubbing her long nose against it. Knock, sigh, knock again. A scrape on the pane. My heart pounded. I prayed that she would not break it. After 3 more minutes, the shadow began to move away. Half a minute later, there was silence. I started to thank God, but then came a knock at the door. All I could think was, please don't let Grandma get up and open it. Luckily, she slept on. The knocking turned soft, mixed with grunting and scratching. It sounded as if the old woman was trying to pry off the hinges but couldn't. After 5 minutes, it stopped. The night went quiet again. I never slept. I only dozed off once it was near dawn. I woke up around noon, dressed quickly, and went to look for my grandmother. Not finding her, I grew worried, remembering the night before. When I stepped outside, she was talking to a policeman. By the time I reached them, the conversation ended and the officer walked away. "Slavka, you're up. Have you eaten?" she asked. "Grandma, what happened? Why was he here?" Can you imagine? Someone from the neighboring plot was found dead. Her children came this morning. They saw the door open and a trail of blood. They followed it to some hut by the lake. I didn't even know it was there, but that's where they found her, all mangled and chewed up. I swallowed hard. Why had she opened up the door to the night guest? Later, I wanted to go see the lake, but the police had cordoned it off. Soon, I learned that they had found a pile of bones and human limbs at the bottom near the shore. Inside the hut, they found a bed and a heap of blood-stained clothes. A week passed by. Nights were quiet, though I still slept badly. The police stopped patrolling, convinced the killer had fled. My parents returned from vacation and took me home. For the next month, I stayed on edge. I could not believe the killer had just gone. I called my grandmother often, but she said nothing strange was happening. A year passed by. Recently, she told me they found the mutilated body of a mushroom picker who had stayed out too late in the forest last night. That's all that she could really tell me.